So where were you in the story? There's a number of possibilities. Were you one of the people watching Jesus carefully? Were you Jesus watching and noticing what's going on around him? Were you the host, assigning seats, inviting people to move up or telling people they need to move down? Were you one of the guests? Were you the person choosing to sit in a seat of honor or choosing to sit in a low seat? It's an interesting way of reading the scriptures, to imagine that you're present and not to assume that you know where you'll find yourself before you start reading, and it really helps if someone is reading the passage to you. It takes away your active reading and prejudicing your placement. I did this with a friend one time who was really struggling, and I did it with the story of Jesus healing the man at the pool of Bethesda, where he asks the man, "Do you want to be made well?" And I was surprised by where my friend placed himself in the story. He said, "I'm one of the people sitting around and I'm wondering why Jesus didn't come and ask me that question." It's a helpful way to read the passage. Well, I can tell you where I show up in this story, and it's because of something that happened to me almost 20 years ago when I was attending my brother's church in North Carolina, which was a traditional church, much like St. John's. And it was around Christmas time, and they were observing the Lord's Supper during the service. And the church that I was part of in California at the time was very laid back, very casual. Baptist churches tend to serve the elements by bringing them to people in their seats, but the church that I was part of, I loved it because you came forward. But there was an extended period of time. We met in a high school cafegimatorium, and so we would come forward kind of whenever we felt like it. And there was kind of an extended period where music was playing, and it was kind of on your own. And so they said that we were going to be observing communion, and they were inviting us to come forward. And we were sitting towards the back because we had Calvin with us, and he was less than a year old at the time. And I felt ready to go, so Kelsey and I got up and took Calvin. I had him in my arms, and we went down the center aisle and got in line. And the next thing I know, there's an usher standing at my elbow. And he says to me, "Excuse me, did you come from back there?" I said, "Yeah." "Oh, well, we're kind of doing this by rows." I was like, "Oh, so sorry. I didn't realize that there was like an order." I was expecting to then be left alone. "I'm going to need you to go back and sit down." So in front of God and everybody, with my less than a year old child, we did the walk of shame back to the back of the church. And I make eye contact with my brother, and he's just like, "Why'd you go?" I was like, "Why didn't you tell me I wasn't supposed to?" He's like, "I reached out and tried. I didn't realize you were breaking the rules." Single most embarrassing moment in my church life. So I am the person being asked to get up and move and relinquish my seat. By the way, that is a terrible thing to do and would never happen to you here at St. John's. There's not a wrong time to come forward for the table, even though we do go by rows, just to be sure. So I've titled the sermon Assigned Seating. There's points in our lives where we are assigned a place, where there's a place we're supposed to be. And it says something about our status, about who we are. The scenario that Jesus paints here of seating at a banquet is about more than just a good seat at the table. The good seat at the table is the table closest to the host. The place of honor is to the host's right, and the second rank is to the host's left. And then everyone else is seated by rank, and their distance from the host says what their status is in that gathering. So this is a really important question of where you're sitting at the table. It's not just about being first in line for the buffet. Status is a form of currency. We use currency to exchange for goods and services, but status is its own currency that establishes our place and awards us privilege. And I think as Americans, we like to imagine that we are a classless society. We've done away with these social ranks of nobility and gentry and peasantry and the commoners. We're all middle class, right? All Americans are middle class. They identify that way. No one in America says, "I'm upper class," and no one in America says, "I'm lower class." We all identify as middle class, which is, of course, conceptually impossible. We cannot all be in the middle. It's not real. We live in a class-based society. Just think about airplanes. There is business class and there is coach. And we like to imagine that the distinguishing factor is whether you can afford to pay for the higher ticket. It's not impossible for you to obtain a business class seat if you're willing to pay. Kelsey and I traveled internationally when we were first married. And when we told the attendant at the airport where we were traveling and that we were on our honeymoon, he was a senior person and was able to pull some strings, and he put us not in business class and not in coach where we had purchased our tickets, but in first class. And right away he said, "Do you have any clothes to change into?" We were like, "I think we have some things that we can." And so we went into the restroom and got changed, and he escorted us through security personally to the first class lounge. This is the secret place at the airport. This is the place with the free, really nice snacks and drinks and the comfortable chairs that you wait in until your flight is leaving. I'd never been in one before, and I haven't since. And so we sat down and we felt like we were out of place. This is where the special people go. We sat down, we're sitting across from a woman, and she struck up a conversation, and we knew we were not where we were supposed to be. So I was being a little bit cagey about how we got there. But she started asking probing questions. And, she asked what we were doing. We were on our honeymoon. "Oh, well, when we get on board, we'll have to open some champagne and give you a toast." And I thought, she had a charming British accent. "Oh, this will be lovely. They're just welcoming us, even though we don't belong here." And then she started asking about what I did for a living. I was a school teacher at the time, and I stressed that I taught at a private school, which didn't mean what she thought it meant. Then she asked where we lived, and that's when everything fell apart. Because living in a one-bedroom apartment in Anaheim, California conveys your status. And she shut down so fast. She got up to go get more refreshments, and she sat somewhere else in that lounge until our flight left. And we got in line to get on the plane, and she didn't even acknowledge that we existed. To say the least, there was no champagne toast for us. But we still got to lie down flat on those really cool seats with all the space around you and the partition, and we slept the whole way to our destination, and I didn't feel one bit bad about it. But class is real. These social distinctions matter. And Jesus notices. Did you see what Jesus noticed? Jesus noticed the way that they chose the seats of honor. They didn't want to be told where to sit. They wanted to choose the place of honor. And we do the same thing. We choose our statuses. We curate our image for others. We tell people who we are and where we fit in the pecking order. We do it subconsciously. We do it on purpose. I was at a networking event a couple of weeks ago, and the host, there were 400 people there, they had these rules. They said, "All right, here's the rules. First names only, and don't talk about work." And I thought, well, that's really silly. The only reason any of us are here is because of our jobs. Like, we would not be here if not for our work. I thought it was a good exercise to try to get people who are at a networking event to advance their careers, to obtain status and position within the world of business and nonprofit and fundraising, to get them to think about themselves as just human beings. That's all very good and well, but I wouldn't have gone just as Marcus. I was there because I'm Marcus Little, who works at the Literacy Center of West Michigan. Otherwise, I would have been home with my family. But it also exposes these dynamics. Because nobody goes to that event hoping to see me and talk to me. But there are people there who people go to that event hoping to see and talk to and get in front of because of their status, because of their position. So I love that this week the reading of this gospel was paired with the reading from Sirach. And the tradition that I grew up in, somewhat bafflingly ignores that whole part of our scriptures, these books that come between the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament, known as the Apocrypha, that Sirach is part of. And it's like saying to God, no, we don't want all of your good gifts, we only want a few. This reading from Sirach is really, really intriguing. He says something interesting. He says that the beginning of pride is sin. That sounds backwards to me. Should be the beginning of sin is pride. Now, the beginning of pride is sin, and what is sin? It is forsaking God. I had to think about that this week. What's going on there? The beginning of pride is sin. It speaks to what we anchor ourselves in, what we root our identity in. If we are anchoring ourselves in just ourselves, not in our Maker, not in the divine Creator, then our only choice is to choose our seats, to tell everybody who we are, to tell ourselves who we are, rather than letting our Maker tell us who we are and having that be enough. We separate ourselves from God at our peril in that way. As Sirach says at the end, pride was not created for human beings, nor violent anger for those born of women. The logical outcome of choosing our seat is a jostling, a striving. One version of the gospel reading says that people were getting there early to secure the best seats. They're jostling for rank. Race cars on a racetrack, muscling past one another. It leads to violence, especially when we feel that others are degrading our worth, assigning us a seat lower than we imagine we want to occupy. Different from my experience at the airport lounge, where through the favor of someone I was able to sit where I didn't belong. When train travel was first invented, this was the first form of mass transportation. There were first class, second class, and third class cars for a reason, and it was not so that the companies could make more money by selling more expensive seats. It was to make sure that people of the lower classes never rubbed shoulders with their betters, lest they see the inequality in society and decide that something needed to change. This pecking order, driven by pride, rooted in not allowing our Maker to tell us who we are and what our worth is, will lead to violence. There was an article in the New York Times today about Disney and the erosion of the middle class, and it spoke to me. I grew up 10 minutes from Disneyland, and I remember going as a kid, and it was achievable to go to Disneyland. They made it affordable, not cheap, but affordable. And the article explores how in the last 5 years especially, it is becoming something that only extremely wealthy people can easily afford to do. And it tells to me, heartbreaking story of this woman who's a bus driver who saves up for several years to take her family to Disneyland and finds that she can't enjoy it the same as wealthy people because now it's a pay-to-play game. You pay to get first in line. You pay to go on the best rides and attractions. And if you can pay, your experience will be better. The author of the article says this: we all judge our well-being against something, typically our past and our peers. Through either of these lenses, the Disney parks and many similar institutions of American culture offer a piece of the puzzle. Compared with the past, a Disney trip is more expensive, to be sure, but perhaps more important, it feels much more expensive because at every turn one is being invited to level up and spend more. Thanks to social media, we can now see the experiences that divide us. Go to Instagram and search for the hashtag Club33, the invitation-only clubs hidden within Disney properties. What you see there will not make you feel a kinship with your fellow man unless you are one of the very few invited in. everything in our world around us encourages us to strive and choose to try to sit in the best seat. And Jesus says, don't do that. Do not sit in the best seat. Sit in the lowest seat. And it's important that we not imagine that Jesus is encouraging us towards some kind of self-abnegation, of denying ourselves to the point of feeling no worth. That is not what Jesus is saying, because that's not how the story ends. Jesus says, sit in the lowest seat because your host, and this is the point where it is now a parable. The first part is just Jesus painting a scenario. The parable is this: the host, our Creator, comes and says, friend, move up. Friend, sit closer. Sirach and Jesus are saying to us, if we would root our identity in our Maker, we would realize that we are already in the position of highest possible privilege and honor. We are friends of the divine. I think the message of all of the scriptures over and over again is to people who imagine that they have to strive to achieve a position of belonging and respect and honor and dignity. And over and over and over again, the divine is saying to them, you already have it. You are already loved. You are already in the position of highest possible dignity and honor. And whether by the voices around us or the voices in our heads that shout constantly that we are worthless and that we must work to convince ourselves and others that we are not, that is what Jesus is speaking to. That is what Jesus is speaking against and encouraging us, rather than striving after those statuses, to simply hold out our hands and receive what is freely given, which is the friendship of the divine. Amen, church?